Introducing Punchbowl News. From Anna Palmer, Jake Sherman, and John Bresnahan. News about the people who matter, for the people who matter. Join the community at punchbowl.news.
Well, good morning. I'm Anna Palmer, a founder and the CEO of Punchbowl News. I'm joined by fellow founder Jake Sherman, and we are thrilled to be hosting all of you for this Friday morning virtual event with the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, Cecilia Rouse. A big thank you to Paid Leave for All for partnering with us for this conversation focused on paid and medical leave.
This morning, we'll welcome Rouse to talk about news of the day, the challenges facing workers coming out of the pandemic, and the efforts around changing paid family and medical leave. Afterward, Anna will host a fireside chat with Don Hucklebridge, Executive Director of Paid Leave, and former Congressman Tom Perriello of Virginia, still of Virginia, but a former Congressman of Virginia, now Executive Director for Open Society US.
As always, we'd like to encourage you to use social media during these events. We are on all social media platforms at Punchbowl News. And with that, we'd like to welcome Chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, Cecilia Rouse, to the stage. Welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Well, for those of us in our audience who aren't familiar with the Council of Economic Advisors, can you explain kind of from 30,000 feet the role of the chair?
Sure. So the Council of Economic Advisors were created by an act of Congress in the late 40s. Our job is to help the president and his administration design evidence-based, theoretically based, empirically based, grounded economic policy. We're kind of like a think tank within the White House, a little bit more of an academic unit, where we're really focused on what do we know about the economy, where do we think it's headed, and we do the economic analysis underlying the policy development.
Well, you're in the right place because we're policy nerds and we're legislative nerds. So that's a good deal. So let's do a couple news of the day questions here. The Senate came through on a big bipartisan infrastructure package. We're still waiting for the legislative language. Our fingers and toes are crossed that we'll get it in the next, couple hours or couple days here. I wonder if you could give us a sense on the politics and on the substance for us. I mean, there still seem to be changes happening. The House could wait weeks, if not months. What our reporting tells us and what Nancy Pelosi says is months. Is that an acceptable outcome for you guys?
Well, look, the Congress has taken a really important first step in terms of the Senate in passing cloture with 17 Republicans. So it's on a robust bipartisan basis. So that's a necessary but not sufficient step in getting it through. But we remain committed. We're working through, as you are eagerly awaiting that language. So are we, because we are eager to get this done. We think it's important. These are historic investments in our roads, our bridges, our public transit that we know need to get done. And so we are, optimistic that Senator Schumer can get this through just as soon as possible.
Talk a little bit about, you said the substance, the policies where you spend a lot of your time. How big of an impact do you think this is going to have on the economy? There's been some questions around the size of it. Is this going to cause inflation? How do you answer those kinds of concerns?
Well, look, what we know about the U.S. economy and the public investment in the U.S. economy is that it's been decreasing over the last several decades. So we have not had the kind of investments in our physical infrastructure, in our research and development, in our human capital that we need if we're going to remain competitive going forward. And so these investments are really important for maintaining our economic growth and doing even one better than that, which is increasing the size of our economic capacity. So we do that through ensuring that our physical infrastructure will, help firms be just as productive as they need to be. It's costly when you're driving trucks over poor roads. It's costly when we're spending billions on addressing the consequences of climate change. We can't continue in this way. We need to make these kinds of investments. These are investments. So to speak to your question about can we take this kind of input injection into our economy, these are investments which are designed to be spent over 8 to 10 years. This is not stimulus. This is not like the American Rescue Plan, which was designed to get us through to the other side of this pandemic. These are meant to be, expenditures that are, we know that there is a cost-benefit ratio, and I should really say benefit-cost ratio, so that the benefits outweigh the costs, but it spends out over years, and they're actually designed to be decreasing inflation over the long term because it's increasing the productive capacity of our economy. So we're optimistic. External estimates suggest this will create millions of jobs. It will increase the labor supply if we combine that with the reconciliation package, Build Back Better. And so we think this is really good, smart economic policy.
Let me ask, we do a survey of senior aides on Capitol Hill called the Canvas. And the biggest gap for us that we've seen among chiefs of staff on Capitol Hill is 90-something, I don't have the numbers handy, but this is a correct encapsulation, 90-something% of Republican aides, senior aides, are very worried about inflation. You might have heard that in their political rhetoric. And only 14% of Democratic aides are worried about inflation. I wonder where you come down and how worried the White House or the CEA believes we should be as a society about inflation.
Look, the Federal Reserve's mandate is to keep inflation under control and to have low unemployment, a dual mandate. So inflation, years, months of high inflation, especially hyperinflation, is not healthy for our economy. It'll really endanger those that we're hoping to will benefit the most from these investments. That said, the kind of inflation that we've been seeing to date, really the evidence suggests that it is associated with coming out of a pandemic, and we're coming out of it, but we're still in the midst of it. I call this pandemic economics. We got a print today from the personal consumption expenditure, the core PCE. That's what the Federal Reserve looks at. It did increase, but it increased at a slower rate than it has. It's been slowly decreasing over the last couple of months. So we're worried about inflation. We are watching it, but honestly, all of the data suggests that it's associated with the pandemic. It's related to supply chain issues. It's related to pandemic affected industries. So as we get past this pandemic, I'm quite optimistic that the inflation will settle down as well.
All right, let's get to the issue of the day, paid leave and medical leave. This is not something new. It's not something that a lot of people haven't heard about or isn't been something that's kind of been in the political conversation for a very long time. But America has fallen behind compared to the world in a lot of instances. Why do you think this is something that has been so hard to get done?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question because we know that paid leave is just so essential to helping workers balance family and care responsibilities and remain productive workers at the same time. 19% of workers have employer-provided medical and paid leave. And, I think and those tend to be the more highly paid, highly skilled workers. I think I'm just going to make this personal for a minute. It's something that I take for granted. I'm provided with medical and paid leave. I was able to take time off with my two daughters when they were born, and that was really important time. And I could do that and remain attached to my employer. So we know how very important it is, and we know that in states where they have rolled out paid leave programs, that it has done exactly that. It's helped workers, especially women, go back to their employers. So why has the U.S. behind? I think one is, as a society, we have taken for granted that there are workers, typically women, who will step in and provide the kind of care for whether it's for their children or for our loved ones who are older, so our elders, and provide that. And they're making difficult choices between working and providing that care. But we also know that health and being able to take medical leave is on almost everybody's schedule at some time. And so that's a bit more of a mystery. I think as a country, we have attached these kinds of benefits to employment and assumed that employers would take it up. But as I mentioned earlier, only 19% of workers are covered. So I think it's time as a country we recognize that we need to provide this kind of social insurance so that people really can balance family responsibilities and remain productive and workers and engaged in the labor market.
I'm curious if you agree. It seems that the pandemic kind of reframed this issue. There's obviously been a lot of focus on the impact that COVID-19 had on women in the workforce. They're more likely to be the care providers of their children and elderly parents. Do you agree? I mean, do you agree with that idea that the pandemic, I mean, and everything that went on with families and caretakers and things like that, it seems like it's just given new urgency and reframed the issue.
I think that the pandemic certainly helped, but look, you're going to have a fireside chat with organizations that have been at this for the last couple of decades and really helping us to understand and stand up state programs from which we could learn and see how is this actually taken up by workers, by employers, what has been the impact on labor force participation, on the attachment between workers and firms. And so this has been a long-term effort by, as I mentioned before, by, Paid Leave for All and other organizations. So, they've laid the groundwork. No doubt the pandemic has helped us all understand, again, this is on everybody's schedule at some time. It's like health insurance. We get sick. And we don't need to go bankrupt in order to pay our health bills. We all need access to good health insurance. And the pandemic has certainly highlighted that we're all vulnerable and we need to have a much stronger safety net so that people can continue to, pay the rent, put food on the table, and in this case, remain engaged workers.
This was an issue that came up during the last presidency when former President Donald Trump was working on some COVID relief. President Joe Biden has included a line item of $225 billion for paid family and medical leave in his infrastructure plan. What's the likelihood that this actually gets included in final passage? And is there something less that you think would still be okay and will be a step forward?
Look, President Biden is so committed to ensuring that we have a robust package of paid leave in this next package. So he's committed and is working hard to ensure that members of Congress understand just how important it is, because the American people know that balancing family and work is just, it's become increasingly difficult. And it's a benefit that especially small employers really appreciate having the public sector involvement in that. They see that it means that they don't have to incur the costs of employee turnover, and when it's provided by the government, then it means that when that worker is out, taking care of their newborn child, taking care of their loved one, they have the funds available to hire the temp workers so they can continue doing their business. So this is popular among the employers that have had the benefit of this in the 9 states that have taken it up. We know it's good for the workers as well. So the president is committed to ensuring that others understand just how important this is. In my interactions on the Hill, I've heard a lot of support for exactly this kind of benefit because, again, those of us who've had it really take it for granted. And it's so important to understand that the majority of workers don't have access to this kind of social benefit, which is really important for balancing work and family.
Could you just talk a little bit about what you're doing on Capitol Hill and who you're talking to and give us, I mean, it doesn't sound, I imagine with some Democrats, you might need a pitch. Many Democrats don't need to be sold on this, but could you just describe kind of who you're talking to, what you're talking about when you're talking to members on Capitol Hill?
Sure. So I have had engagements with members on the House side, members on the Senate side. And what I want to talk to them about and what I go and talk to them about are about the economics that underlie it, in particular, the Build Back Better program, the Build Back Better plan, which is to say that, again, the bipartisan infrastructure framework, now I guess we can call it a plan, that's past cloture, is about investments in physical infrastructure. But if we're going to have robust economic growth, we also have to be making investments in our people. And so that starts with pre-K and childcare, because we know that $1 spent in pre-K or childcare pays for itself over the lifetime of that child multiple times. In terms of, improved schooling outcomes, less likely to commit crimes, being a more productive adult. So we know that investments in childcare are important. We know that investments in post-secondary. I do a lot of work on higher ed, and we know that the costs have been increasing. We lower costs and increase access. And importantly, as part of the Build Back Better plan, There was also funding for community colleges to help them develop programs to ensure that students actually complete their programs. For those who are serious and want to be completing, that they need to have good quality programs with wraparound services. And there's good evidence that programs like that can help students actually, satisfy more credits, complete their degrees, and then earn higher wages. We also know that, the home care and our elderly our elderly parents and our loved ones, that is a system where there's a wait list, and that the care workers in that sector are really underpaid, and that when we increase their pay, that the quality of care they provide improves. So I go up and make the case why the investments in human infrastructure are just as important for increasing our economic prosperity going forward as the investments in our physical infrastructure.
So we're quickly running out of time, but I do want to ask you, a lot of the strategy around the bipartisan infrastructure deal from the Biden administration has been kind of going out to states, making the sales pitch, kind of that outside inside approach. Do you think there needs to be more done on this issue and others, and when it comes to the human infrastructure side? Or should we expect that going forward, that this next part is going to be talked a lot more out on the road?
The president is committed to seeing both parts of this plan, because really both parts, when he was candidate Biden, both parts reflected Build Back Better. And so dividing them up was part of a strategy. He was very committed to passing as much as he could on a bipartisan basis. That's the way he likes to roll. He would love for the Build Back Better part, the investment in human capital, to be passed on a bipartisan basis. It's popular among the American people, including Republicans. He's not just president of, the blue states, but of red states as well. He's looking out for them. So he is committed to both parts. And yes, you can expect that he will continue to make the case. All members of his cabinet are out and are being pressed into service and have been pressed into service, because it's just so important that we make these investments. They're long overdue in this country.
All right. With that, we will let you go. Thank you so much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it. Jake, I'm also going to take it from here, so we'll say goodbye to you as well.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Now, I'd like to welcome Don Huckelbridge, Executive Director of Paid Leave for All, and former Congressman of Virginia, Tom Perriello, Executive Director of Open Society, for a fireside chat. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having us.
All right, Don, I'm going to start with you. We just heard a lot about how the president and his administration are framing paid leave, medical leave. I do think, despite the fact that this is an issue that's been around for a long time, there still seems to be some confusion about what exactly it is. From your perspective, you work on this issue all day, every day. How do you define it?
You are right that there is a lot of confusion. So let me try to be very simple and clear. There are different kinds of paid leave: paid sick leave, paid family leave, paid medical leave. Most often when we say paid leave, we're talking about paid family and medical leave, meaning if you have a serious health condition, if you're welcoming a new child to your family, or if someone in your family needs care for a serious medical condition, that you can take that time. And what I think is really important to say is that we are one of the only countries in the world that doesn't guarantee any form of this. But we now have this amazing opportunity to change that.
I want to follow up just a little bit on what Cecilia Rouse was talking about with the pandemic and kind of how it frames this issue. And maybe for people that, all of a sudden you had so many people working from home, you had people really putting into, having to, both mothers and fathers being primary care providers to their children, their teachers, their elderly parents. Do you think that has helped the urgency here, or kind of at least made it so that people understand kind of at more of base level what might be needed as a country?
Absolutely. I think, this was a crisis in the making long before COVID, but I think that the pandemic has really just put it into focus and put it front and center. This has always been urgent, and I think now more people simply understand that, whether it is the caregiving crisis we've all experienced, or whether it's just the realization that any one of us can be one diagnosis away from a crisis at any time. So I think it's really heightened the urgency, as you said. It's made it more relatable for everyone. But this is something that will impact every one of us. Throughout our lives, every single one of us is going to need to give and receive care. So we also need to be prepared. There will be probably another pandemic. This wasn't the first, may not be the last. We need to have these protections in place before a crisis hits.
Tom, I want to bring you into the conversation. Open Society has long been a leader on this issue. Can you talk about the CARE Fund and how you see the historic nature of it and why it's so important?
So first, I just want to say how excited I am this morning because I got to start the day seeing one badass group of women champions defeat Dutch in soccer. And now I get to be with another badass group of women champions that are advancing paid family and medical leave. And I really don't think it's a coincidence that President Biden has put these very strong women in charge of setting an agenda that's based on the real economy and not an academic or hypothetical economy, or one that just thinks we need to kind of nudge ourselves back to where we were a couple of years ago. These are people who understand we have to fundamentally reimagine the American dream for a new economy in a new century, that the American dream simply isn't affordable anymore. And we need to give people a basic freedom from fear that you're not going to be able to afford childcare, fear that you can't take a day off of work without it making you go bankrupt, fear that you're not going to be able to care for an aging parent, or fear that the people taking care of your parents or your children aren't getting a living wage and therefore are exhausted from working a double shift and not able to focus as much as we need on our loved ones and family members. So here we see an agenda that's based really solidly in the lived realities of American families. And that's true of Black, brown, and white families, poor, working class, middle class, even the barely rich, a term that didn't even exist a few years ago. And when we see these costs of childcare going up, we see this problem of a basic idea of economic security and freedom from economic insecurity. So what we've done at Open Society is invest in these amazing tables like the Paid Leave for All, groups that are advancing the care economy. And we see people like Dr. Rouse and others coming in who've really redefined the economic field and are bringing a perspective that I think is resonating with Republicans, Democrats, independents, not inside the Beltway, but when you get into, the rest of America, this is just an issue that really brings people together. And I think it's such an exciting opportunity for us to catch up with the rest of the developed world. And folks like Dawn have really been making sure to lead the way on that. And we're proud to be with them.
I want to talk about that polling in a minute, but before I do want to ask you, because I think one of the things that's been really interesting about the coalition that you, Open Society, and others are a part of is philanthropies, and even a lot of companies now are kind of coming forward on this issue in a way that maybe 10, 15 years ago, that wasn't the dialogue. What's happening there? It seems like this is kind of that all hands on deck moment that you see on issues at certain times.
It really is. This is about what gives America a comparative advantage. And when our workers are showing up rested, when their families are taken care of, they can be more productive at work. We can be more competitive with the countries that already have these programs. And one of the times you want government to step in is where there's otherwise a race to the bottom. And I think one of the things we're hearing from businesses is that if you require this of everyone, then you're not punished for treating your workers well. In fact, you're rewarded. And we want to create that kind of race to the top for economic mobility and economic security, where that middle class sort of make the middle class affordable again. And I think that's what Dawn and others have put together is business leaders, worker representatives, women's groups, pro-family groups. This is really at the heart of that. And really what they're all saying is we need the federal government to act on this because it creates an environment that rewards us for doing the right things by our workers.
Don, the former congressman talks about polling and kind of the widespread support that you are starting to see. It's not necessarily a Republican or a Democratic issue, an urban or a rural issue. Can you talk a little bit about what you all have found in some of the recent polls?
I'm happy to. And I was just going to add on quickly to the last question, because this is such an important point, that paid leave and other care policies are not just about protecting the individual worker, although that's so important. They are tools for economic growth and resilience. And we know that passing paid leave and other care policies would actually yield millions of jobs, billions in wages, and trillions in GDP. And in the states that have paid leave, we've already seen great evidence about how it increases productivity, performance, profitability, and honestly, workers are happier, and that tends to be good for all of us. But yes, paid leave has always been one of the most widely supported policies in this country. we continue to see that bear out. We did some polling recently in Senate battleground states. We found that 84% of voters in those states wanted to pass a national paid leave policy. That includes 96% of Democrats, 81% of independents, 74% of Republicans, including 74% of Trump voters. And supermajorities of them want it passed now in a jobs package. And they said it cannot wait. So this is something that is a no-brainer. I think voters and families and workers get it. And more voices are coming out and shouting and saying that this is the time. We can't afford to wait any longer.
Tom, taking off of what Don was just saying, right? We see so many of these issues that have widespread support across the country, or certainly even in battleground states. But when you come to Washington and you get into the Congress, the divisions remain, and this seems to be one of those examples. Putting on that former congressman hat, what do you think would resonate? I mean, particularly with some Republicans who are hesitant to see this move forward. How would you sell them on that?
Well, first of all, I think there's some in the Republican Party who want to make it the party of the working class, and there's no better sign of them doing so than to support this kind of policy, and no better sign that they're full of it than to oppose paid leave and medical leave that is so crucial for actually helping the working and middle class. And I think while we all want to see bipartisanship return in Washington, I think the reason the bipartisan consensus fell apart was in part because that consensus was out of touch with everyday folks. It was focused on a set of issues that were not the same ones that people red, blue, or purple outside the Beltway were struggling with. They were saying, I can't afford to raise kids anymore. I can't afford childcare. I'm working a second job just to cover it. And how the heck are we going to save for college? What happens if we have a medical bill? What happens if a parent has to be taken care of? And Washington wasn't responsive to that. And I think while Mitch McConnell benefited in some ways under President Obama for being the party of no and simply blocking him from succeeding, I think now the GOP risks an enormous political cost for looking like the party that's standing in the way of solutions, and President Biden being the party that's trying to solve things. So you have one side seeming to still create chaos, going after windmills of CRT and this, that, the other thing. And then you have a group of people that have actually gone out and listened to the American people, regardless of politics. And things like paid leave, medical leave, and this, these things matter. And this is why Care Can't Wait is resonating so much as a movement and as a set of policies. I was on the Hill a couple weeks ago or last week, and one of the interesting things was Republicans cannot get their base upset about the Biden agenda. That's part of why they're focused on critical race theory and other things, is because their base likes the Biden agenda. And I think their hope is they can stop it from happening without getting the blame. But I think the Biden administration has seen that play before. They're more than happy to welcome them to join in the credit as they're doing with the infrastructure bill. But they are going to put the American people first and deliver for them. And I think the GOP is going to have some decisions to make there on issues like paid family medical leave.
All right, we are quickly running out of time. But Don, before I do let you go, I want to ask you about, or have you tell us about August plans. Obviously, members are trying to get out of town as soon as possible, although the work is still remaining for at least a week or so, maybe more. But you are headed out to the country. Talk about that.
We are hitting the road. So we are beginning the Paid Leave for All bus tour Monday, August 2nd. I'll be heading out of here shortly. We're going to be in 9 states in the District of Columbia. We're going to be engaging members of Congress, local leaders and legislators, small business owners, families and workers, people of all kinds, to talk about how important paid leave is, how much they want it passed now, and how this is the moment. So look forward to seeing you all on the road. You can find more info at paidleaveforall.org. And that's our plan for August.
All right. Well, Don and Tom, thank you so much for joining us today for this important conversation and for partnering with us to make it possible. Thanks to all of you on the live stream for joining us. If you aren't a subscriber to Punchbowl News, please check out punchbowl.news and subscribe to our free morning newsletter. You can check out our website for upcoming events as well. Thank you so much and have a great day.